3 young Europeans are believed to be among the brutal murderers in the latest ISIS video, showing a beheaded American aid worker and the deaths of dozens of Syrian soldiers. Meanwhile, Europe is facing the tough task of preventing its young men from joining the extremist cause, which at the moment is spreading like wildfire. Sabika Razvi has more.
As the latest ISIS video rocks the world, Europe is facing its own challenge, rooting out their deadliest development, homegrown terror. European citizens make up the largest contingent of fighters who have joined ISIS extremists in Syria and Iraq. And the militants behind the most recent brutal murders of US aid worker Peter Kazik and over a dozen Syrian soldiers have so far also been identified as being from France and Britain. One man has already been named as being Maxime Orchard. Orchard has been on the radar of French authorities since 2011. In the video, he is seen herding prisoners to the execution site. And today, prosecutors are investigating the possibility of a second Frenchman in the same video.
As well as Maxime Orchard, a second Frenchman may be involved, but it's too early to be sure. The anti-terror section of the Public Prosecutor's Department, as well as the DGSI security service, are currently working together to decide whether the hypothesis stands up and whether or not it can be confirmed.
And last night it emerged that a UK medical student may also have been part of the same group. Identified as Ahmed Mutana from Wales, said he thinks he saw his son, a 20-year-old from Wales, Nasser Mutana, in the same video. For his part, British Prime Minister David Cameron has said the 6 terrorists who carried out the killings must face the justice they deserve.
As the House knows, these include new powers for police at ports to seize passports, to stop suspects from travelling, and to stop British nationals returning to the UK unless they do so on our terms.
This is not the first video to purport European killers behind brutal beheadings. US reporters James Foley and Stephen Sotloff and British aid workers David Haynes and Alan Henning were also beheaded by European militants. Analysts warn Europe is fast becoming a fertile ground for ISIS to find supporters, as thousands of young nationals have headed off to fight with the terror group. With more than 1,000 people in France alone under surveillance for suspected plans to join the militants, authorities now face a bigger challenge. The pressure now is to prevent more European citizens from going to join ISIS and put a stop to the killing rampage.
To discuss this issue with us in our London studio is our senior correspondent Hassan Al-Katib. Now, the UK and US are adamant that they will not negotiate with terrorists, but as the killing continues, what can be done to stem the violence, Hassan?
A lot can be done to stem the violence, and in fact, countries like the UK, France, America, and other European countries, and including countries in the Middle East, have the capabilities and are able to stop the violence in Iraq and Syria, and they can stop a lot of terrorist attacks, they can stop a lot of terrorism being committed in these particular regions. But the real question is do they want to stop the violence in those countries? And every time we hear reports about terrorism and terrorist attacks, the UK, France and other countries seem to be very concerned about the people who they have nationals, their own nationals who are being killed in those regions. But they don't really seem to be very concerned about when it is Iraqis or Syrians who are being killed in those particular regions. They only seem to be concerned and very selective about their concern only when their own nationals are being killed or allegedly being beheaded, as we've seen over the past few months.
In relation to their nationals that you mentioned there, Hassan, Cameron does seem quite sure that stopping the ability to travel and making returning to the UK conditional will discourage support. Do you agree with that?
Well, what he is saying is that he is trying to put pressure on those people who who are in Iraq and Syria about coming back. He also mentioned in his speech that they should agree on their terms about whether or not they should allow them back into society. What kind of terms are we talking about? There's another thing which the British government have been thinking about, is whether or not to completely bar them from coming into the country. For me, that really isn't going to work. It's not going to prevent people from going over to fight in Iraq and Syria. There's a report from the British government that have said that 5 people every week from Britain alone are going over to Iraq and Syria to fight. They can do a lot more to try and prevent that from happening, but to say that we're going to, stop you from coming into the country, that isn't enough. You should first of all prevent them from flying over to Iraq and Syria in the first place. You should put pressure on Turkey. If the British government are serious about preventing terrorism in this region, they should try and put pressure on Turkey to say to them to stop their borders, because anyone could go to Turkey and it's nothing wrong, but they can go over across the border into Iraq and Syria, and that's where the problem lies. And that's where Britain should be trying to put pressure on the Turkish government to prevent people from entering Iraq and Syria. And they're not doing that.
Yes. In regards to the key term now being used is homegrown terror. What is causing young men and women to join these militant groups in the first place?
Their first response would be a grievance. They have a grievance that there is injustices being committed in these particular areas such as Syria and Iraq. But first of all, we have to understand there are grievances right across the world. You can say there are grievances in Myanmar. Muslims are being killed over there, in Kashmir, in Chechnya, in places like the Central African Republic, where Muslims are being slaughtered. Look at Palestine, where Muslims are being slaughtered in that particular region. So you can pick a lot of grievances out there in the world where people will probably think about going to fight. But however, they only are picking Syria and Iraq. Why is that? That's because countries like America, Israel, Europe, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey are creating an atmosphere and an environment where they are encouraging people to go over fight in Syria and Iraq.
But are you saying that that's the only reason you think that they're going there in the first place?
They have grievances, and it's easier for them to go into those areas where people have created an atmosphere where they give them money, they give them facilities, they give them weapons, and they pave the way for them to go and enter those particular regions. They can do so for Palestine, they can do so for any other country like Myanmar, but they're not doing that. And it's because of the agenda, the Western and Zionist-inspired agenda to create chaos and destruction in those particular regions, that they are trying to attract people who may have a grievance about Syria, but they also have a grievance about Palestine. Why are they not going to Palestine to fight? Because there is no avenue for them to do that.
I only have time for one more question, and so if I may just ask you that last one. Now, we know that many nationals in the UK and France are currently under surveillance as potential recruits to ISIS. How effective do you think this may be?
Well, I think Britain, France and America, they all have a very sophisticated surveillance system where they can track and monitor calls, emails, individuals, groups who have militant tendencies or who are thinking about going over to fight. They have connections maybe with people who are in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. They can pretty much identify those people. They can stop them and prevent them from going. But the real question really is are they doing that? Have we heard reports coming out from Britain and France and other countries whereby they have stopped people at airports from going over to Turkey and then afterwards into Syria and Iraq? We haven't really heard that from Britain and America. And I think there is another game that they want to play, is that they want to allow them to leave Europe and America. They want to get rid of them because they feel that these people who have militant tendencies are better off going over to Iraq and Syria and getting killed over there instead of thinking about causing terrorist attacks in the UK, in Europe and elsewhere.
Hassan, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there. That's all we have time for. Our senior correspondent, Hassan Al-Katib, thank you very much for joining us today.